Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. We have a great show for you today. We are going to be covering a lot of NFL. There's a bunch of news that came around it, and also we're going to be continuing our MLB offseason series, the MLB offseason files. This time we'll be jumping into the defending World Series champions, the Texas Rangers. But before we get into that, we're going to start off our show with the NFLPA's second annual report card. Just came out earlier today. We're going to look at all the weird, wacky stuff that came into that with some trends, see who has improved the most from year to year, among other things. Like I said in segment 2, we're going to continue our baseball coverage with the Texas Rangers. Segment 3, Mel Kiper. He dropped his mock draft earlier today. We're going to go through that, talk about a couple things that I found interesting in that draft, and some things that I agree and disagree with. And finally, we're going to close out our show. There's been a lot of rumors around not just quarterbacks in the free agent market, but quarterbacks that are on teams seemingly safe or unsafe, where they might go, what their future might have in store with their teams. But yeah, before we get too far into this show, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to new link, GSMCPodcast.net. So much easier, rolls right off the tongue. Again, you can leave a tip or donation. It'll scroll across the bottom of the screen. We'll have a little bit of a discussion. We appreciate anything you give. We appreciate you watching. Again, that link is GSMCPodcast.net. But without further ado, let's just get right into it. Like I said, the first story and the main story that we're going to cover today is going to be about the NFLPA's second annual report card. If you remember last year, they dropped this report card for the first time. It had a lot of interesting findings, including the Commanders being the worst rated team. The Jaguars had rats in the locker room. There were a lot of things that we found out. The Cardinals had some really, really bad facilities. But that was last year. This year there have been some changes. Some things have stayed the same. At the top of the list, Dolphins and the Vikings in a league of their own. You go look at every grade, and they are well above everyone. What they do for these report cards is they take 11 categories: treatment of families, nutrition, weight room, strength staff, training room, training staff, locker room, and travel, and they give each team a grade based on it. And each of those grades has a different weight. The grading weight, also coaches and owners are on here as well. So the owner has a 15% weight towards the total overall grade. Head coach is 10%. Travel is 9%. So is strength coach, weight room, training staff, and training room and locker room, as well as the cafeteria. The dietitian and the treatment of families are both at 6%. So the biggest factors in this are the club owner and the head coach. So we'll take a look at those. And that led to some surprising results. These grades go from A+ to F-. F- is a 49 and below, and an A+ is a 97 and above. So there were a couple big things that stuck out to me. Obviously, we already mentioned at the top of the show that the Vikings and the Dolphins, who were the top two teams last year, continued to be at the top of the list. In almost every single category, they were well ahead of every single team. They believe they had A's across the board, at least for the Minnesota Vikings, and the Dolphins as well. Both of those teams had A's across the board. They were the only two teams to have that. So good on the Vikings and the Dolphins. Last year, the Vikings were number one. This year, the Dolphins are number one. They did do a little flip-flop there. And we talked about rats in the Jaguars locker room. And that was a big reason why the Jaguars were all the way down at 28 in the last NFL Players Association poll. This year they jumped all the way up to 5. So massive improvements from the Jaguars. It's what we like to see. That's the reason that stuff like this is put out, is so that the players can air their grievances and that these teams can improve. The Bengals had a grievance last year saying that they never served the players 3 meals a day, and while that wasn't entirely fixed, they did move to 3 meals a day on Wednesdays. So you can say minor improvements. Improvements are improvements. At the bottom of the list, we talked about the Dolphins and the Vikings. At the bottom of the list were the Washington Commanders. They were at the bottom of the list last year. So 2 years in a row, they are the only team in the NFL to ever lose this. They've lost it both times that this has been done. You'd think with a new owner, Josh Harris, that some improvements would be made. And while their grade was a little bit better than it was last year, it wasn't enough to not be last in the league. Getting rid of Dan Snyder is a huge deal for them. So, looking at all this, they still ended up at the bottom. They had Fs with almost everything. They had 1 D+, 1 C+. They did have an A+ for strength staff, which is good because we've heard horror stories from them with their strength staff. So they are making improvements steadily, but it's not enough. They're still the worst in the league overall. We talk about another surprising team, and this one was probably the most surprising thing to me. The most surprising thing to me was the Kansas City Chiefs ranking. The Kansas City Chiefs were 31st, just ahead of the Washington Commanders there. And a lot of that had to do, we talked about the percentage breakdown. A lot of that had to do with the fact that their owner was rated the worst in the league. They were promised new facilities, but they never got those new facilities. They were promised a lot of things that just never happened. And it really is interesting to see them have so much success and the players be so unhappy. They did rate Andy Reid as the best coach in the league. He, like I said, coaches got rated. That was 10% of it. So Andy Reid was rated as the best coach of the league. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have guys like Josh McDaniels, who got the worst grade for head coaches. He alone is there in the D. There's a big crowd above them at B's and C's and A's, but the only one that got a D was Josh McDaniels for the Raiders, and he was fired mid-season. We're talking about 3 coaches who got A+ grades. That would be Andy Reid, Dan Campbell, and Kevin O'Connell. So the Lions, the Vikings, and the Chiefs gave A+, but the Chiefs were still at the bottom of the league, which is really interesting to me. You talk about a team that just won back-to-back Super Bowls, and for the players to come out just a month later, not even, with this report saying that, oh, it sucks here, basically. It's not the greatest look. You'd think that with success, they'd be able to, make some of those changes. They'd be able to make the players happy. But it's really a disappointing report card for them. Their best grade was in treatment of families. They got a B, or excuse me, I guess it was Andy Reid. They had 4 Ds and an F. They were the worst ranked team in training staff, which for a team that makes these deep runs is crazy. You can't be hoping, you can't be making these deep runs with this bad of training staff, and hopefully that changes, because obviously health is the most important thing in the league. You could have the most talented roster, you could have the best people out there doing it on the field, but if no one is there to help them stay healthy, to help them stay on the field, you're not going to be a good team. So for the Chiefs to be as successful as they are and have the worst training staff is kind of shocking to me, honestly. Like I said, their owner was rated the worst. They did have a lot for families. And the only positive for food service was that they got 3 meals a day. So they're beating the Bengals at something there. But it's really disappointing for the Kansas City Chiefs. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Those were the main points that I got from the report card. There's obviously a lot to look at there, and not a lot of time. I would highly encourage that all of you go check it out. It's a really quick thing to go see. You can go see where your team is located. My Giants were in the top 10, so that's something positive for us. So there's always something to look forward to. Take a look at these rankings. They're really interesting. Keep an eye out for next year's, see if these teams can improve. In our next segment, we're going to be covering the Texas Rangers and their 2024 offseason. I appreciate everybody so much for tuning in and sticking around. Stick around through this quick break. We will be back with the Texas Rangers in just a second.